for it.
Ta-da.
Yeah, ta-da. So, like this week, it's not really even this week. It seems like an idea that I've been playing with for a very long period of time. All right, is that um, we start with there's like a basic division um, that we make when somebody comes to take riding lessons. All right, they're not interested. They're interested in doing something with the horse. And the issue or the problem with that is on a pragmatic level, it's more important to learn how to be with the horse before you start to do with the horse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've been thinking about this because I was thinking about, we have there's this like procedure where you take a beginner and then you sequentially inform and educate to get them to a high level. And so that there's this method or process that everybody who learns to ride has to more or less go through because of because of the mentality that was fundamental to the people that were teaching riding and what we've inherited from the past. We look to do it very fast.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason we look to do it very fast is because our riding has been inspired by, informed by military equitation. So a lot of what everything becomes is 30, 60, 90 days of training. Everything becomes quick and instant. And it comes quick and instant because who the hell's got the time when the country is in danger and we need to use the horse to save the country,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty much 19th century, very early 20th century view on horses. Were militarily significant. So that becomes, or the military desire to try to improve or increase the quality of the horsemanship became more and more problematic when there was difficulty with the amount of time there was to educate people.
Right.
So if we go back to, I would say, 18th century, 17th century mentality, the mentality was considerably different, especially in an aristocratic household. Like the way you and I are teaching or the kind of riding we're advocating, all right, is a riding that's really actually goes back earlier than what we would call modern riding.
Yeah.
Okay, so the difference is that in the very old ways of working, being with the horse was the first step and the first stage. All right, we're not doing. So when I give you a horse with a saddle and bridle, and you don't know anything about horses, and then we figure out more or less how to get you up there, you don't care about being with the horse. What you care about is doing. And so your main focus is to control, and I'll use a funny word, to control the cardinality of motion, meaning when you get on a horse, or not even getting on a horse, any object that's in motion has an element of cardinality to it. In other words, when I say that something's cardinal, okay, it's that there's direction to it, that there's a vector to it. So in other words, if you're riding the horse or you're not riding the horse, it really doesn't make any difference from the horse's point of view because the horse is moving.
Mm-hmm.
All right. From a human point of view, we're preoccupied with where the horse is moving.
Right.
So what that means is that right away, the presumption is the horse, regardless of whether the human is competent in what they're doing or not, that it's up to the horse to figure out what we want and not to go that way, or to go that way, depending on, how we present it. But you have no equilibrium on the horse because you're a beginner.
Mm-hmm.
So in the method that we're using, or the way that we're using the lunge line, okay, as a way of allowing the rider to cultivate first, how are you with the horse? When the horse moves, how can you be with the horse in such a manner that neither you nor the horse's balance is offended?
Right.
All
Finding
right.
harmony.
Right. So, in other words, no matter what you know or you don't know, there's going to be movement when you're on the horse. When the cardinality, meaning the direction or the flow of that movement, is in the direction that you agree with, you think you're in control.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the skill is first to learn to go with the flow.
Right.
And the second skill, all right, is to become mutable. When I say to you become mutable, there's a fixity to the balance, and things are moving in a certain fixed way. You're following the motion of the horse. So there is movement. It's cardinal. You're in harmony with it. And now what you want to do is, what's the difference between a left and a right, a movement to the left and a movement to the right? Okay. And what you can see by that is, if I say to you, okay, now go in the right movement, for example, meaning that you're moving to the right, it's like, clockwise. Move
Mm-hmm.
to the left, counterclockwise. So your ability to accompany the movement is the beginning of control. So in other words, so what's mutability? Well, this fixity, in the sense that my weight is on the horse in a certain way. That's what seat training teaches you.
Mm-hmm.
From the horse's point of view, the work in hand teaches the horse the same thing that seat training teaches us. In other words, when the work in hand is well done, the horse manages its weight with rhythm and with cadence. It's not rapid, slow, and it's not frozen. It has a tempo to it, has cadence to it.
Mm-hmm.
So we got cardinal to get to the point of where there's cadence. The muscles, when the horse moves, contract and relax, relax. That they go back and forth between that. That pulse is the source of the horse's movement. So the first
Right.
thing,
And without a good seat and without a horse that has a good cadence, you're never going to be able to find that song.
exactly
What most
right,
people do is argue and
right,
basically push and shove the horse in the general
right,
direction that they want. But working that way is never going to get you to a high level because you're not controlling the weight on each of the 4 feet. You're just
right,
generally shoving the horse in a specific direction. And it's not
right.
that you can't get it to work that way, but you're not going to get to a high level or be a skilled horseman that way.
Well, I mean, I could say that I agree with you. Flip it from the horse's point of view. Now, from the horse's point of view, the horse can only present to you that which it's capable of in its balance. And if
Mhm.
you are interfering with, the two parts of the movement, which is the bones
Right.
and the musculature, when
Hmm.
those things are interfered with, the horse loses coordination and you lose your seat, even though you might have a very educated seat. When the horse becomes irregular, you can't sit it well.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been thinking a lot about this because there are so many, like if you said to me, how do you do? I mean, pick a movement. It doesn't make any difference what movement you pick. There are so many ways that you can communicate to the horse the idea of how to move its body in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But within that confine, there's only three, potentially optional four ways that you can do that. So that I could say to you, cardinal, mutable, fixed. Okay, so when you have a, like if you do the way that horses are started or were started in days of old was through the use of a single pillar.
Mm-hmm.
All right. In essence, you tie the horse to the pillar, and then the horse is encouraged to circle the pillar. Okay, so when it's done with a highly emotional horse, it's very irregular,
Mm-hmm.
but the pillar is absolutely fixed. So if the horse is explosively irregular, the horse may become injured
Mm-hmm.
because the fixity of the pillar doesn't change.
Right.
When you do work in hand, okay, you become the single pillar. Now, I'm not saying that you can't progress out of that, but that's the early work. All right. So once there's a fixed point in the horse and you have sufficient education as a rider, there's a fixed point in you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do work in hand really well, and if there's a certain point in which you realize, it's a funny way to put it, but it's simple. The nature of a wooden pillar. So you learn to use your body and your aids like that wooden pillar.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So initially, the horse is mechanically dominated by, we could say, the tree, because
Right.
I'm sure the original fixed pillar was not likely to have been a pillar. It was more than likely a tree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But whatever, it was a fixed point at which the horse turned around. So when you do work in hand, you're that. When you do work in under saddle, you stabilize your fixed point, which is another way of saying to you, fix your seat.
Mm-hmm.
And then you establish a relationship between the horse's center and your center.
Well, I was just about to say that is that you could call the fixed point your center. And so there's the center in you, and there's the center in the horse, and then there's an agreed upon center. And what
Right,
most people do is argue about the agreed upon center and
right,
interfere with the horse's center because they don't have a sense of their center.
right. And the fact is, I mean, balance is as stupid as it sounds. Balance is really black and white. You either stay on or you fall off.
Right.
All right. So then if we look at riding that way, you either stay on or you fall off. Well, that's the standard that most people who ride horses judge success by.
Yeah, true.
But yes, if you didn't fall off, it wasn't that bad. On the other end, both you and I, or both I experienced educated riders, think at least for a moment, well, there's a little more to staying on than just not falling off.
Yeah, yeah. Used to be my standard too, though.
And you can't dance a dance unless you have music,
Hmm.
you have agreement to dance.
Hmm.
And
Right.
riding horses is exactly like that. I mean, and it's not like you can't get a cattle prod and go to a dance club at night and pick your gender, male or woman, with a cattle prod, you'll get them to dance,
Yeah, yeah.
like it or not. But there's a lot of difference between, funny way to put it, maybe, dance of love and a dance of indifference.
Mm,
And most of us, when we ride horses, do a dance of indifference.
hmm.
In other words, we are who we are. Get over it, horse. You better follow me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you think you can give me crap, I can give you more crap than you can give me. And that game works about 99% of the time. Every once in a while, maybe one out of 100,000 horses will say, I ain't doing it.
Yeah. Yep.
And so then you think, it's a crazy horse. But, the reality is the rider never got in harmony with the horse.
Hmm.
And on the other end, it's like, what kind of a life do you want to have? Do you want to have a life of constant arguments? Or do you want to feel that there's a movement of harmony in your life and everything is flowing wonderfully?
Well,
Yeah,
sadly, most horses just experience the argument, that they
right.
never experience the harmony and feeling listened to. It's always one of the interesting things when we get horses in that have been trained, is that they don't have a sense of the conversation. They just roll
Yeah,
their eyes and think, oh, what are they going to bully me into today? And trying to get them to come out of that shell is the first step.
yeah, yeah. And that's not such an easy thing to do. I don't, like when I think about doing this stuff there's two things I've been thinking a lot about online teaching and how um, it's one thing when from my personal experience, when I'm teaching somebody who I've met in person and I've been working with and then go online, than somebody I've never personally interacted with online. And I have the feeling that people are so off the rails in the riding that it's almost impossible to try to get somebody online, because you'll see everybody who's ever got near a horse, even if they're fairly insecure, thinks they know something about the horse.
Hmm.
And it's not about knowing and making, it's about being with the horse, and it's about learning how to be and to move with the horse. And while I know how that's done, and I think to myself, as a result of my life and experience, oh, that's so easy.
Hmm.
It's like I then look at people trying to figure out how to do this stuff, and it isn't simple and it isn't easy for them.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about that an awful lot, because I think about there's what I learned as a beginner, which is like Meshuggah crazy, because I was trained in a pretty normal, I would call it American horse training way, and then I personally then had European education, so a much more formal, um, basically U.S. cavalry training. And then I got the older forms of riding, and came into contact with the older forms of riding. And I think about that whole process and I think, well, why couldn't I have just gone from a beginner right up to an advanced rider? And then I think about that, and I think about the differences is the way the rider thinks about it.
Yeah.
I mean, the difference, one of the main, when I'm riding, it's interesting because people, like, what are you doing when I'm riding? What am I doing? I'm really not,
Yeah, I know it's hard for me when people ask me that question too.
I'm just being, and I get the energy flow going a certain way till I get bored and then decide to make it go the other way.
Hmm.
And if it's a problem with the horse, it then becomes this dance.
Right. Well, the word that comes to mind is curiosity. And we talk a lot about trying to make the horse curious. And this is even wasn't related to horses, but I heard this the other day that somebody on a podcast is talking to this person that is a marriage counselor and asked them, what is love? And the marriage counselor answered, curiosity. That when you're always curious with your partner, that's what love is.
Yeah,
It's the same thing in the horses.
yeah.
But when you're doing, you're not being curious. It's more making.
It's also, especially relative to the horses world, it's the opposite of fear.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think the horse's curiosity is a good way to judge how good a methodology is.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I shouldn't say this really black and white, so I'm going to be a little cryptic about it. But I was in more than actually, as I think about it, there's quite a few places. I've been at some of the top riding schools in the world. All right, national riding schools whose specific names should be remain nameless. But one of the things I found most interesting is going into the barns is to notice that when you come to the door, the horse is back in the corner of the stall.
Mm-hmm.
Like in your barn or in my barn, when you come to the door, if you go in, you hang out for a little bit, boom, the horse is in your face.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like, oh, what's up? What are we doing? Are we doing something? And it's like they want to have the conversation. Whereas, these, what we would say would be top international schools, what does it say about the school when the horse won't come up to you?
Mm-hmm.
So I find that kind of an interesting aside. And then this idea of the three things in the training and the maneuvering of the horse, okay, is cardinal, mutable, and fixed. All right, cardinal means that there's motion, there's energy, it's going in a certain direction. Fixed means that as a result of the movement, that movement rotates around a given point, a fixed point, which in the old training would have been the single pillar. And in
Mm-hmm.
our work and the way we work, it's actually a direct rein.
Yeah.
Okay. Or versions thereof, without going into great detail about that. All right. So that's the fixed point. So, in other words, if you want to turn a horse any way you want to turn, if you want to have control, if you want to have the cardinality agree with where you think it should be, which is your feeling that you're in control, okay, there's a first off a fixed point, and then there's second the place where you're going,
Mm-hmm.
and then the third point is mutability. So mutability is when something's mutable, it's the ability to soften and tighten.
Mm-hmm.
So when the horse moves, the horse dances. So the simplest one to think about is the trot, because you got two beats, 1, 2, 1, 2. So in essence, if you look at the trot, when the horse extends its right diagonal, the push of the left rear leg pushes the horse to the right. When the horse pushes to the left diagonal, the right rear leg pushes the horse. So when both of those pushes are equal, or when the falling of the weight agrees with the mechanical thrust of the legs, you get a symmetrical rhythmic trot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, working out the math in the walk and in the canter is certainly interesting, but just on a very simple level, all right, to be able to do that. And so then people think, well, they take, for example, the posy trot. Why do we rise to the outer shoulder? Well, we go up and down to the outer shoulder, so we keep the weight over the outer diagonal. That enables the left rear, all right, in other words, the right diagonal, the thrust from the left rear, to maneuver the horse to the right. And when you're in the riding ring, the rail's on your left. Okay, you don't need to worry about going to the left. You only need to worry about going to the right.
Mm-hmm.
And so by posting on that diagonal, it tends to keep the horse on the rail.
Right.
So, is that diagonal right? Is it correct? Well, at a certain level of riding, that's what people think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And ultimately, does it matter? Yes, if you're showing horses and they're judging the diagonal. Does it matter in the real world? Yes, it does, depending on the quality of the turn you want.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you want the turn from the push or from the weight, and how you blend it. Is Do you think this? I'm trying to take the idea of seat training out
Mm-hmm.
and to show how within the phases of movement of the horse, your ability to follow it is step one, which is being with the horse in motion.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
step two is once you can follow it, now try to control it.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
So whatever line you're going on, if I'm saying, okay, make a right turn, okay, there's too much right, and then there's too little right, and
Mm-hmm.
there's what's in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So if the horse gives you too much right, okay, you have to look at the way that it's balancing. You could say, too much right. What's it like if I do too much right? You don't have to argue with it. Feel
Mm-hmm.
what too much right feels like. Then feel what too much left feels like. Then feel back and forth between the two. Don't allow it to be too much right, and don't allow it to be too much left. Keep it in the center. And how do you do that? You balance the masculine and feminine aspects of the age, meaning, essence, you dance with and follow the motion of the horse.
Mm-hmm.
You see, and I think intellectually, I think this is fairly simple.
Yeah.
But I think in practice, I I mean, a part of me doesn't understand why this should be hard. Like God, I've taught enough people over the years. You see that very few people ever find it easy.
Well, and you have to remember when you were learning that you didn't find it easy.
Right. But a lot of the reason I didn't find it easy is because I had the wrong ideas to begin with.
Well, I did too.
Yeah,
Think a lot of people do.
yeah, yeah. And I'm not quite sure how to work it out because the thing when if we hypothetically for a moment, just for simplicity's sake, if for no other reasons, say that there's a correct way and a wrong way to do this. All right, just hypothetically, okay. Well, then how are you going to? You have to be willing to explore too much and too little to understand what just right is, which means you
Right.
have to be sufficiently balanced enough, all right, that you're able to control your fear.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Okay.
we're
And
running out of time, so I think a good point is that you have to play with it and you have to be with your horse.
right. And a good place to start is when you groom them, even though you're doing something. And sometimes just go hang out with your horse.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Not to do anything or say anything,
Yep.
to be with the horse.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I think did we live through another podcast? Is that
Yep.
pretty
I think
much
that's it.
okay? I hope my rambling and your rambling will illumine somebody's life.
I hope so too, and encourage them to go be with their horses.
Okay, kiddo.
All right.
We'll